and welcome to the Railway Laser Lines How To series, and this is our latest 00 gauge kit, which is a mess room stroke stores or whatever else you want it to be. I'll just go through all the parts now. There will be a parts list with you in your kit, so just double check, make sure you've got all the parts, but these what will come with the kit. So bottom base, pretty self-explanatory. Engraved lines to show you the external and internal walls and all the holes where everything drops into. You've got a skeleton frame for the long sides and then the ends. You've got your internal dividing wall and your small dividing walls that will go here and here. You've then got your external long brickwork and your external side brickwork. 10 big windows, 4 small windows, 4 small pieces of glazing, 10 big pieces of glazing, 2 door steps for the 2 doors on the kit. This is the downpipe supports to go onto the brick wall. There should be a downpipe here, but it's not here for some reason, so I've either left it at the unit or it's fallen out. So there's a small downpipe, and the downpipe will go into that little hole in the brickwork and then fit down the side using those little brackets. We've then got a base of a roof. We've got the side roof long supports, end supports, and then your base roof top sides, long and ends. You've got your window ledges, and then you've got 2 doors and 2 frames. Now regarding the doors, you can put this part on top of that part to have a 3D effect door, or if you just want a single door, just use that part and don't use those parts. Hopefully that makes sense. So they're all the parts, so just make sure you have all those on your checklist, and then we can think about beginning the build. So where do we start on the kit? Most probably your best bet is to prime your base in a concrete color and allow that to dry, and obviously put that to one side when you've done it. I'm going to use, I think, precision concrete. That works quite well. And then you'll need to prime the inner sides of your skeleton frame. Now obviously on the external you'll see the brickwork is like this. So if we turn the skeleton frame over to match the brickwork, this is the outside of which the brickwork will attach to. So we don't need to be priming that. The glue will bond straight to the MDF. So I tend to put a cross on that side to know that I'm not painting that side. So all I'm going to do is paint that side, and it'll show you the engraved door inside as well if you just want to go over it with a different color paint or do whatever you want. So that's that part. On the rear side again, so the windows are facing, from memory, on that way. So no, beg your pardon, no, I did it right. So facing that way, so again that needs to match. So that's the external, so I'm going to cross that one, and it's the inside that we're going to need to paint on the sides. So the windows on the side are that way around, 2 to the left, 1 to the right. So that's the external. We can put across. We're painting the inside. And then last of all, we have the left hand side external brickwork, so we need to turn that over so that matches, so we can put across that side. So this is the side we need to paint, and again it has the engraved inside door. So those are the 4 parts you need to prime. Now I'm going to prime them in Halfords white primer. What I'm also going to do is I'm going to prime the inner walls as well. Now this is the first time I've used this on a kit. I've used our new push to fit system on the ends, which basically they will just literally push in. If you start at an angle and then push it down, it will slot in. You don't need any glue. Now for the purpose of priming, I would strongly suggest that you mask these parts up. On the skeleton kit, it's not the end of the world, because obviously once you put all these together, then the skeleton frame will just go on the outside and it'll just clip in, and we will glue the ends, and then it'll slot into your base. But for purposes of priming here, I would certainly mask up any end parts. And you'll also need to do your windows. So again, use Tamiya masking tape so you can double side them, put them on, and they'll be easy to take off. And you'll need to paint both sides of the windows because obviously they'll be showing inner and outer. And again, I'm going to just use simple Halford's white spray primer, give it some light coats, and eventually it will tape to it. Once they're dry and your skeleton framework is all dry, you can then glue your windows in place. Now bear in mind, because this is a double layered building, we don't just use brickwork for our externals. We make sure our kits are quite strong and secure. So you will need to add your windows in. So when you come to add them to these parts, so this is the cross, so this is the outside of your building, your windows will need to be flush with the edges of the outside of the building. So internally you'll have a little gap that will allow you to put your window glazing into the back of the window. Hopefully that makes sense, but we'll show you as we go along. While we're doing the white primer, we can, obviously this is your roof. Now there are two engraved little squares. You could put some 3D light vents or whatever you want on there, but I just did that just to distinguish the top and bottom, to be honest. So again, I'm going to mark that with a cross. Now, although we may well be adding some gravel or sandpaper to the roof, it needs to be primed, and also the underside will need to be primed as well. Now I'm going to have this as the ceiling, so this will be white primer to match the skeleton frame inside, and on the top I'll most probably do it white as well, just to save time. You could do it grey, but as you're doing priming, it just makes sense to do white and not muck around. And we don't need to prime these parts as yet, because obviously these will be gluing to the side of this. So what we might want to do is glue these in first before we prime, and then we can prime all this at the same time. But we won't be adding the top parts because obviously that will be a different color. And will it need priming? Yeah, it does need priming. To be honest, all MDF parts should be primed to protect them. So you could actually build the whole lot of this, prime it all white, and then just paint the outsides of your roof supports in a different color. Again, we'll come back to that shortly. The model board can be primed or painted. Don't use acrylic paints, enamel paints. Acrylic paints are your best bet on model board. And again, these are your window ledges. I've allowed a small gap on the external brickwork to allow for a little bit extra paint, and again I might use precision weathered concrete for that. Door steps, again precision weathered concrete, something like that, and the gutter holders are most probably spray black. So there's quite a bit of spraying to do. So that's all the parts. Hopefully all makes sense. So I'm going to take some of the parts in, mask some of the parts up, and we'll take it into the garage and prime those up. So before priming, I'm going to add all the parts to the roof. So you need all the bits, and you'll see that these parts have a slightly wider lip on one side compared to the other. This side here matches the thickness of this material, so it needs to go at a 90-degree angle up against there and allowed to dry. And then once that's dried, then you can fit the edging trimming onto the tops and it slots in. And again, you need to repeat this all the way around. And then what I'll do is I'll prime the top part, prime underneath, and then I can add sandpaper or ballast, and I can paint the out edge trimming as well. What you might need to do, obviously, because you're fitting this to these notches, that obviously they will show, so I will add some polyfiller and just go over it with it and then sand it to make it nice and smooth. I might add some extra lines on, but these engraved lines represent sort of like edge tiles, but I did this on Healy Mills commission building that I'm doing, and by the time you've primed it, filled it and painted it, these basically don't really see much of them, so it's not the end of the world. But I'm going to glue all these together first before we prime it. So that's what your roof should look like with the edge trimmings around the roof. And now all we need to do is add the cappings to the sides, and they should hopefully all match up in the corners. Then once you've added the cappings to the sides, turn it over, flip it down, and just make sure then that all these edges are lined up. So obviously I've added a tiny little bit of glue in there, so hopefully when it dries it will all fit nicely around the top of the building. So turn it upside down and just make sure they're all nice and flush. So there's our first prime coat of all the parts. Now you will find that the MDF will start to soak in all this primer, and it'll leave it all grainy and bitty. So ideally you need to do a second coat once it's dried and sanded down. Really depends on how far you want to go. You might not want to sand these down, just give it another coat, but the roof is going to look a little bit nasty inside with all, you can just see it coming through now, all the bits. And again with the floor, you want to make sure that's nice and smooth. So I might just sand that down. I might coat that with Precision Engineers, not engineers, Precision weathered concrete. Just go over it, protect that, and obviously once the building made, I can paint underneath an acrylic black just to protect the underside of it. The windows have had their coat, a few light coats. Obviously these are really small and tiny. I may end up doing the window slightly wider on the production kit. I think that's 4 bricks high. I think I might do it 5, but we'll wait and see how it comes out. So allow those to dry thoroughly, and then obviously we'll need to turn those over, remask up and paint them. And obviously on the internal pieces, so the large one and the 2 small ones, they need to be turned over and primed as well. And again with the roof, that will need turned over and primed, but again, as I mentioned earlier, you'll need to sand along the parts where it's joined to hide the joint, fill it, sand it, and then prime it. So but that's a bit later on. Anyway, that's in the cabin and we can let that dry. Moving on to the external brickwork, all I've done here is simply added some Tamiya masking tape on the back, double-sided it up, stuck it to a spare piece of MDF that I've used for painting before, and I'm going to give these a couple of coats of the Halfords Red Oxide primer. Right, that's that primed, and all we need to do is let that dry thoroughly, and then obviously once we've made the skeleton framework we can add that to the external. Now as we're doing this mesh room kit in O-Gauge as well, these are the O-Gauge external bricks. Now I haven't used the Halfords Red Oxide primer for O-Gauge because the bricks are bigger and the engraving seems to work a lot better on O-Gauge. We can actually paint these, and I've used Humbrol enamel, matte 62 paint I think to this, so it's just brushed on and left to dry overnight. And then what you can do, because the bricks are bigger, you can use a very small brush and you can pick out individual bricks and go to town on O-Gauge. For the demonstration purposes of this building, I'm not going to be doing that, I don't think. And with the bricks painted enamel, once you've then finished doing that, and if you decide to paint individual bricks, you can use acrylics for that if you want to, or enamels. Once you have done that, I then give these a light coat of matte varnish. That is an important part, because obviously when you come to do the mortar joins, this will protect the paint. Now on the double O-Gauge ones with the red oxide primer, I'm not going to be doing any mortar, just haven't got the time to do it. It is possible to do it, and there are different ways to paint double O-Gauge bricks, but a bit of matte varnish on these will protect these. And I will most probably add these to the skeleton frame and then do the mortaring once it's fixed to the actual framework of the building. So the next part I should be doing is to paint the base. Obviously we've previously given it a couple of coats of white primer, that seals it nicely, and I'm going to use the Phoenix Precision weathered concrete matte paint, and I'll just give it a couple of light coats, might sand between 2 coats, allow it to dry, and basically going to get all the way over the top and on the side. So I'll most probably put a little bit of MDF underneath so it raises up, and try not to get any inside the holes, because obviously when we come to add our skeleton frame we'll need those to be as free as possible. So if you do get any in there, just get a cocktail stick or paintbrush and just wipe away any excess paint that you might have got in there. So next job, give that a coat of paint. Now that all these have dried thoroughly, I've given that a light sand, and I've also given these all a light sand. I'm going to give these another coat. I'm not going to give that a second coat because we'll be painting that in weathered concrete, and obviously these need to be painted both sides, but the skeleton frame doesn't. But I've sanded them down, going to give them another coat. So we'll give all that a coat, then once that's done we can put them aside, and then we'll turn these over, these 3 parts, and we'll paint those, and then when it's dry sand it, give a second coat, and they're ready to be done. And then we can take this back upstairs, we'll paint that, and then we'll think about putting it all together. So let's go back into the garage and give that a second coat of primer. These are the skeleton parts for the O gauge, and as you can see I've actually masked off this time the bottom noggins that go into the base, and I've also masked the edges that go for the sides, because when you come to glue the edges, if you've got no paint there, it's a lot better. Now obviously on the 001 that I've just showed you, I didn't mask up, I just carried on, but I ended up sanding down. So it's worth a little bit of extra time by masking up all these bits, so when you paint them and you take them all off, you're left with bare wood, which should slot into each other and the base a lot easier than having to sand it. So that's just a tip. It's up to you whether you do that or not, but I would certainly recommend it. Now that we've painted the windows both sides, a couple of light coats of white primer, and our internal walls, it's a matter of now of putting the windows inside the holes. Now, as mentioned earlier, we want to be adding the windows so they fit flush with the non-painted sides. So they need to add a little bit of glue on the inner edge of here. Put your windows in, use a cocktail stick to push it down so it's flush with the bottom, and then that's done. Then obviously when we come to add our glazing, we can just fit it in here and it'll fit nicely. So I'm going to take these off of the masking tape gently, because obviously these are extremely thin and fragile, and then add them to all the window holes, and hopefully none of them will break, and I'll come and show you when they're done. So that's hopefully what yours looks like, and then we'll move on to doing the remaining 2 panels that need the windows. So they're flush with that, and obviously then we can add the glazing inside here later on. And hopefully your windows should look something like this, flush with the top edge of the MDF, which is the non-painted side. And then obviously when we turn them over, you'll have the recess where we can add the glazing, which is on the inside. So that's those. I'll put those to one side to dry. We don't need those for the moment, and then we'll move on to the next section. So hopefully you've got all your windows installed into your skeleton frame. So the next thing we need to do is to get all our glazing. Now the glazing already comes pre-cut, and they have backing on the front and back. Now for the small windows, I'm going to make it as though that's sort of like a toilet. So I'm going to leave the backing on these and glue it in position so it gives it like an opaque effect. The rest I'm going to just peel off, so we've got some clear glazing, and all you've got to do is turn it over, and we'll add a tiny bit of glue and glaze around the outer edge of the window frame, drop the window glazing in, push it down, and then hopefully that will be good enough. Any excess that seeps out you can use a cocktail stick to wipe away, but you don't need much, to be honest, in the way of glazing glue. And obviously, like I mentioned, that's the stuff I use, Deluxe Materials, glue and glaze. So let's stick those all in place and we'll come back when that's done. So there you have it, the windows are all now in. All I've done is basically use my cocktail stick and I put a tiny little dot of glue in each corner. That's all you're going to need. Take the backing off the windows. I cleaned them before, and then obviously I drop them down on a piece of kitchen towel, and then I use my tweezers to pick them up and stick them in, and then I use the back of the tweezers just to push down on the glazing. Don't want any finger marks over them. So, and obviously there you go, hope you can see a shine. There you go. So they're in and that's done. So that's dried, and once they're fully dried, we can start to add the internal 3 walls, which you should have painted both sides, and hopefully you remembered to cover the ends, because these have a slightly different fitting. This is the new push to fit system, where they'll just literally pop into these holes at an angle. You put them in at an angle. So basically, just an example, so let's say that one goes in there, you stick it in at 45 degrees like so, and then you push down and it should slot in. Now if you've sprayed a lot of paint inside or on here and a lot of paint's gone in there, you may need to sand slightly to get that out, and if that's the case, you'll need to use sort of like a small nail file or something, but there's not a lot you can do about it. But just make sure you don't get paint on these ones here. If you have, you need to sand them down so they'll fit in there. You'll soon find out when you come to do it if it don't work or not. So we now move on to fitting the skeleton frame all together, and the first thing you want to make sure is that all your parts actually fit into the holes in your base. If you haven't masked up the bottom noggins, then you could have done that, but all I did was just go on over with a small bit of sandpaper and just sand them off, check they all fit in, and they do nicely. So now we know that obviously we want the internal walls facing white inwards and not outwards. So the small part here we need to fit in there, and we need this one, we need to fit in here with the door facing closest to the door. Now these are the 2 parts that have the push to fit system in. So what we need to do, if I can grab that, is obviously this piece here is going to go in there, and we want it near the door, so put it in at an angle and then just push it down and it slots in. That's it, done, simple as that. Then we want to do the same to the other side. Now obviously I can't show you that one because I'm holding the camera and I don't really want to put that on upside down. So all we need to do there is fit that one in exactly the same fashion. So I'll do that and come back and show you when that's done. Right, so they're now pushed in, and they're nice and flush up against the internal wall. And what we need to do now is to take this part out, and we need to slot this one in. So hold it in at an angle and then push it down, in, done. And then we want to turn it round, and then we want to get this piece and we want to stick that down, and then we're going to grab hold of this piece. I'm doing this one-handed, so really shouldn't be doing this one-handed because in case it snaps, but again, in at an angle, and push down, and it's done. So that's that. Then all we need to do now is we need to just tidy up, make sure that they all fit. Just don't put too much pressure because there's not a lot of support on that piece there. So we need to make sure that now we are adding the side pieces. So obviously we can add those. Make sure you get them around the right way, and again we're going to be pushing the push to fit system in this end here, and then we'll add the push to fit system in that middle one there. So we'll add those, come back and show you when I've sorted that out because I can't do it one-handed. Right, so we've pushed to fit this one, this side, this end there, and that end there. Now it creates like a shell, but obviously we haven't glued the end corners. Now ideally you need to, because they will come apart, but once you put it inside here it shouldn't do. But because we're adding an external brickwork to this, we want to make sure. So just grab some rocket card glue, get your cocktail stick, and then just prise it apart slightly, add a bit of glue in there, and then add a tiny piece of masking tape around just to keep it in position, and duplicate that for all 4 corners, and then allow that to dry. Once it's dry, we can then aim to slot this into our base. And again, if you've got too much paint on here, you've gone inside, you're gonna have to try and find a way of getting the paint out, but hence why I showed earlier that you make sure that you put your pieces in to make sure they fit in. Right, so let's glue this together in the corners, come back once that's done. So once you've glued on each corner and added a small piece of tape, I've then fitted it onto the base, pushed it in, played around, just manipulate it, push in, and it's done then. So we know that's now all totally square, and we can allow that to dry. And then once that's dry, we can then think about adding some external brickwork, which we'll come to shortly. Now you will have, where you've joined the inner wall together, a joining part here, and also another one here. Now you can, if you want to, add some fine surface polyfiller and use your blade to scrape it over, sand it down, and then paint it again. It's a little bit difficult when you've used a white primer and a spray can, because you hardly match it. So I'll most probably just fill it and then sand it over, and it will know. And then most probably, ideally, this will have something on the wall inside here, so it would hide that, and the same with that side. But you could go with a bit of white paint, or even painting it slightly different colour. It's entirely up to you. But you could leave it as it is and then add something there, like a cupboard or a locker or something, whatever. But that's entirely up to you. But that's drying. I'll put that to one side, and we'll move on to the next part. We're now ready to put the brickwork on, but before we do that, we need to make sure that all our external corners are nice and flush. If it hasn't glued correctly with the tape holding in position, you might just want to go around and sand the edges. Now I've gone around and sanded my edges anyway, because I try to just take a shave off each corner, so when we come to add the brickwork, where the bricks interlock in the corners, they should hopefully butt up nicely. So it's worth getting your brick pieces and just go around and just test them in the corners and make sure they all fit nicely. And then what I'll do is I'll dab some glue in little bits everywhere, not too much, because obviously this needs to be quite tight up against the skeleton frame anyway, so it won't be a huge amount of glue. And then I'll add some glue in the corners, and then I'll off at one side, make sure that's fitting nicely, allow it to dry, and then I'll do the following side and the following side. And for this I'll most probably use the rocket card glue as well, but it will dry fairly quickly, so you could use the glue and glaze. That does give you a little bit more time, but it is a little bit thicker. Rocket card glue is nice and thin, so I think that's most probably what I'll use. And again, you don't need much glue. So let's add some bricks and see what it looks like when it's done. And there we have the brickwork glued in position, and I've just added some Tamiya masking tape in the corners just to hold it together, just to make sure it doesn't come apart. Very little glue on the panels, and I literally sort of like clamped it in my hand and held it there for a good few minutes, making sure the butt joints are as close as possible. Now you might find if you put too much glue, or you've painted too much on there, or not done the corners, they might protrude or indent slightly. Unfortunately, with precision laser cutting, it's got to be absolutely precise, and we can't guarantee you getting it spot on. But this has turned out really well. Those are really good. I might just add sort of like 0.05 extra to help out, but I think we should be okay. So I'm going to let that dry for a good half an hour, take the Tamiya tape off, and then we can fit the roof and make sure that all fits nicely. Hopefully your roof should look something like this. We've given it a little small coat of primer on the top. Don't need to worry too much about that one, but we've given it a couple of coats of white on the underside, and we've added some filler along all the joins. Now all that remains is that we sand these down. I just use some P120 sandpaper, go around, sand it all down, make sure I get the filler that's on the inner corners or inner edge, make it nice and smooth, and then that will be ready for painting, or adding some sandpaper on the top and then just painting around the edges. It's entirely up to you. I haven't decided what I'll do yet. We'll show you as and when we go along, but next job, just get rid of all the filler, make it nice and smooth, ready for painting. So I'm happy that they're all sanded down now and nice and smooth, and obviously you can see I've sanded down quite a bit of the filler and also the top coat of primer. That doesn't matter because we'll paint this again, but I want to add a gritting surface to the roof. So I've got some P180 sandpaper, which is red just by chance, and I've cut this in size, and obviously that's going to fit inside there. Now it needs to be glued all the way around, so I'll get some, most probably get some thicker glue. I think the Rocket Card glue most probably is a bit too thin for this, so I might use a bit of PVA. Apply it liberally on the surface, and this is the reason why we do prime this side. If you didn't prime it, then the glue will, all the moisture will go through the wood, and when you come to put that on, although it'll fit, you might find that your roof slightly starts to warp. So you do need to make sure that you prime this, and it wouldn't hurt to give this another coat of primer, to be honest, but push for time, so I'm going to just add some glue to the back of the card, stick it on, and I'll cut that to size, and then we can think about painting the roof. Now obviously we need to keep the underside white because obviously it'd be a ceiling, so we can mask off underneath, and then we can paint the roof in grey, black, whatever colour you fancy. So I'm going to add the sandpaper to the roof by adding some glue, come back and show you when it's done. Now that we've added our roof surface, some sandpaper, and that's glued in place and now dry, we can think about painting the top of the roof, but obviously we need to mask the underside because we painted that white. So I've tipped it upside down and I've added Tamiya masking tape around the edges, so I've got a nice crisp join along the edge, so when I come to paint it I can peel it off and it'll be fine. Cover the rest of it underneath with normal masking tape, and then I've just gone over it to stick it to this piece of card, and I'm going to go in the garage and give it a couple of light coats of black, allow it to dry, and then most probably another couple of coats of black. We'll show you once that's all complete, and then we can add that to our complete section of the build. Right, so now that we have painted, so we've added a bit of sandpaper on top, glued that in position, sanded down all the bits and made sure and give it a coat of black paint. That's looking good. So all that we need to do now is to go on the other side. I don't want to put this down because obviously my table's a bit dirty. Let me shove it on that piece of kitchen towel for a minute. What we need to do is we need to then mask up around the outer edge of the lip here and the roof ceiling, and then we need to paint the inside edge of the roof black, because obviously you'll have a slight overhang on the edge, but it will make sense to paint this black as well. You could most probably mask this up and just paint it an acrylic black, but because I've got the black spray paint out, I can do that. So I'm going to mask it up, and then we'll come back and then we'll spray inside there and allow that to dry, and then that's finished. Now that the underside of the roof has dried, I've taken all the masking tape off, so that's done. And obviously we've also done the brickwork, so all that remains is literally this now becomes a removable lid and it sits on top, as simple as that, and that's done. And then all that we need to do now is to add the door and the door, and there will be a small drain pipe that fits into a tiny little hole there. You might not be able to see it, but there'll be a drain pipe that goes down there, and that will complete your build of your mess room stores. And obviously able to take the roof off, you'll be able to either add some lighting or add a load of 3D items, put the lid back on, and job's done. And you can add some roof vents as well if you want to, that's entirely up to you. But I'm still waiting for the doors to dry, so I'll add those once they've dried, and I'll show you when it's done. So all I've done here is some more Tamiya masking tape, doubled it up, and then added the lintels on there so they don't move, and the door steps, and I give those a quick brush of some weathered concrete. Now I can't remember from memory if I've done the ledges that they protrude out, so hopefully you can just paint the top and the sides. You won't need to paint underneath. I can't remember, and plus the fact that chances are you looking underneath this building is pretty remote anyway, so you can paint both sides, but I just got a feeling if you paint both sides you might not fit them in. I allowed a little bit of tolerance for some paint, so I'm just going to do one side. I'll have a look and see how they look. If it's any different to how I think you should do it, I'll let you know, but I think we can get away with just doing the tops, the edges and the side, rather than both sides. We also need to add the 3 doors. They haven't been added to the kit when I built this, so they'll come in your kit, and they'll most probably be in either 1 or 2 parts. I might do the same thickness of the doors, but they might look a little bit silly. Not unless you keep them closed, but the idea was to have some doors ajar, so they might come in similar to your front door in 2 pieces, so you can have sort of like a different style effect door and then lodge it open. But it will come in part of your pack, and it'll be pretty self-explanatory what you need to do with those. Right, and there we have our completed build, apart from the rear gutter. Now obviously the little window ledges, when you've painted them and dried, you'd add a tiny little couple of dabs of glue to the inner edge of the brickwork, and then these just slot in. There's a groove for them to slot in because they protrude a little bit either side of the window frame, so it slots in one side and then it'll just drop into the other, push it up against the window, and jobs are good. And that's the big windows. There's no ledge for the small windows, they're just too small. But all the other windows I've got them, and then obviously then the door, I've added the doors. Now I haven't added the frames because I think the card I've used is too thick, so I will need to change the thickness of the card so it gives you the 1/2 mil to put the door frame in should you wish to. And obviously also the door steps have been added as well on both sides. So there you go, that completes the build, apart from, like I said, the gut at the end, but I don't think we need to show you how that's done. It's just a matter of gluing it in place, simple as that. There you go. So there is one mess room, stores room, whatever you want to call it, available in 00, and the O gauge will follow shortly as well, and it'll basically be exactly the same build. I don't think there'll be any difference in the build at all. It just goes together quite well, so really pleased with that. So there you go, thanks for watching, and we'll see you again soon on another How to Build series from Railway Laser Lines. Take care, cheerio.